Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Digital Label Masterclass webinar series. This is our first event, and over the course of the coming weeks and months, we'll be covering a range of topics around digital label printing. What we're aiming here today and for this range of webinars is to share knowledge and experience around the subject, and we'll be talking about market trends, technical aspects related to digital print technologies, material selection for specific technology or the market segment, and we will be also walking you through specific print jobs and covering other interesting topics. In order to zoom in on those topics in greater detail, we will be inviting industry experts, both from Avery, Dennison, and from organizations present in digital print industry. As I've already mentioned, today is our kickoff session, and here we will be looking at different digital printing technologies, discussing how to choose right materials for their technologies. We will also be talking about the evolution of digital printing and discussing some key market trends in the industry. Today's presenters, our technology experts, are Corey Keller, who is a Senior Product Manager at Avery Dennison North America, Frank Janssen, who is a Senior Printing Associate at Avery Dennison Europe, and my name is Vladimir Tulpin. I'm a Segment Manager, Digital Print and Media, and I will be your moderator for today's session and for the all coming events related to the digital printing. Before we begin, a couple of administrative remarks. First of all, this webinar is recorded and will be available at your disposal. The same is correct for the slide deck, so you will get it shortly after this session. We encourage you to ask questions, and for that we have a space at the bottom of the screen. We also have polls, which are also available at the bottom of the screen. In those polls, we ask you one question, and the question is if you're considering investing in digital printing in the next 1 to 2 years. And there is a multiple choice question, so you probably will be able to answer that in less than 10 seconds. Please answer that any time during the session, and we will look at the result together at the end. As we have a mixed audience today, I would like to ask you only for label printers, label converters to answer that question so we can enjoy good statistics in the end. With that, I suggest we go right into the session. We will start with Frank, who will take us through digital print technologies and material selection, and we'll continue with Corey, who will guide us through evolution of digital print technologies and also the market trends. On that note, I would like to give my word to Frank. Frank, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Vlad. I will tell you something about the different digital technologies and materials that can be used for those different printing techniques. Can you go to the next? If we look at digital printing, we see two main categories. Toner, that one was the first on the market. Toner printers started somewhere in the mid-90s, and we see there that that are divided in two groups: dry toner and liquid toner. Let's start with liquid toner. Liquid toner is the typical field of HP Indigo. HP is the only one using liquid toner. And then dry toner, the biggest player in dry toner is Zycon. And there are some smaller players like Konica Minolta. Those are the players that work on the industrial scale. For dry toner, you also have some smaller printers, some more desktop printers, and then we see brands like Oki, Astronova, and Nitron. If you think about toner, in general, toner can be compared to a laser printer that you potentially have in your office, or a photocopier. Most of the time that's toner, and that's dry toner. And for label application, Zycon and HP built bigger industrial machines. So that was about toner. Then the second group is inkjet, and inkjet we can divide into two groups again. The first group is UV inkjet, and the second one is water-based. We will dig into the technologies in the next few slides, but in water-based space, we see brands like Colordyne and Mouvant. On the industrial scale, and there are desktop printers from Epson, Affinia, VIP, Primera, Astronova. And then if you look at UV, then you see brands as Domino, Durst, Zycon, Screen, EFI, Jetrion, Gallus, Label, Fire. UV is always an industrial technology, so there are no desktop machines for that one. Go to the next slide, please. We will zoom in at dry toner. On the left side, you see a section of a dry toner machine. You see a drum, and on this drum, the toner is attracted by electrical charge. So the drum is charged and then exposed to the toner. The toner is attracted by the electrical charge. And then it can be deposited to the substrate. To achieve anchorage between the toner and the substrate, heat is used. So the transfer takes place under pressure and heat. The good thing about this is that you can print on any substrate. You do not need any special primer or top coat or whatever. You can print on basically anything. The bad or the downside of that is that it might be difficult to work on substrates that are sensitive for heat, like PE. So PE can be a bit challenging. To overcome that issue, Zycon has developed a so-called ice toner. So with an ice toner, you can print on also on PEs, and with the standard toner, PE is too challenging and cannot be printed on a Zycon machine. But with the ice toner, you can print on all substrates. Thermal papers might be also a bit challenging. Dry toner printers have a typical speed of up to 30 meters per minute. That's for the industrial printers. And then for the desktop printers, the speed is lower. That's more up to the 9 meter. Also very typical for dry toner is the food safety. They're always compatible with indirect food contact, and for some substrates or for most products, as long as it's not oil or fat, can also be direct food contact. That's about dry toner. Then we go to liquid toner or liquid electrophotography. That's the technology of HP Indigo. I think most of you will know the name. You have a same drum, the photoconductor drum in the section on the left part. That's very similar to the Zycon one, but there is a step between the photoconductor drum and the substrate, and that's the blanket. So first, the image is generated on the photoconductor drum, and then it's transferred to the blanket. And then, in the second step, the transfer goes from the blanket to the substrate. So there's an intermediate step there. The positive side about that is that you do not need heat to transfer the image, but you need a specific primer or a specific substrate to receive the image. And that's a very specific HP Indigo primer. And this primer can be applied or can be achieved in two different ways. The customer, the print shop can buy a pre-primed substrate from a media supplier like Avery Dennison, or HP is also selling inline primer units. So that's more or less a coating station before the print station that applies the specific primer. If you look at the speed of a HP Indigo device, that's also up to 30 meters per minute. And about half a year ago, HP has announced the LAP-X machine. It would be shown on the Drupa, but Drupa is postponed. That machine can achieve a speed up to 120 meters per minute. So that's really a serious production speed. For the rest, if you compare the speed of toner technologies, HP and Indigo, to conventional UV flexo printing, the speed is relatively low. But as soon as you start talking about speed of 120 meters, that's really a serious speed. Concerning food safety, Indigo is okay for indirect food contact. Yep, go to the next slide. Third technology is UV inkjet. As is in the title, It's inkjet, so the ink is jetted from a printhead, from a nozzle. A drop of ink is jetted to the substrate. That's also what you see in the section on the left side. So there's a chamber with ink, and that ink is pushed out, and then a drop is flying, and it will land on the substrate. When you look at the ink, the pigment, the color part of the ink, that's only roughly 8% of the volume of the ink. The big chunk of the volume, that's oligomers and monomers. This is a chemical substance that is needed to make the ink liquid enough to be jetted. And then there's photoinitiator. Photoinitiator is needed to react under UV light, and then it will start cross-linking, and then the ink will change from liquid to solid. But like said, only 8% of the volume is pigment, is the color. Print performance of UV inkjet is depending on the top coat chemistry, so you need a specific substrate in order to be compatible with UV inkjet. Open fiber materials, papers, they are really recommended to prime before to achieve optimal print performance. And if you think about food safety, there are low migration inks available for indirect food contact. So the first generations of UV inkjet presses were what we call within Avery Dennison with conventional printing inks. So there were the species could migrate from the ink into the container. And most brands now offer also low vibration versions of their UV inkjet presses. Durability of UV inkjet is really the best in class because the ink, because it's cured by UV light, is really very hard, and it will be very resistant to scratches and things like that. Because, well, let's say 80% of the volume is in oligomers, or 90% of the volume of the ink is oligomers and photoinitiators, there will be a thick layer of ink on top of the substrate. So that will give you some tactility. The ink is really laying on top of the substrate. Then if you look at substrates, yeah, there are differences in the treatment of the substrates. You can play with what you want. If you look at the right side, you see a wine paper. If you do not treat the paper before printing, or if you use a standard wine paper, then the ink will sink into the substrate, and that will give you a poor sharpness, and also the color will be less dense. There will be less color pop. If you use an optimized substrate, like you see on the right side, you will have a nicer image quality, so better sharpness and better color reproduction. So for UV inkjet, you need to choose the substrate that is compatible with the technology and pre-treat it. It can be, in most cases, these are substrates that are also printable with UV flexo. In the case of wine substrates, you need a specific pre-treatment. Okay. Looking a bit at durability, here we are comparing analog UV flexo printing against UV inkjet printing. And in the left column, you see the same label, only the top one printed with UV flexo. There should be the same image, and this is a drum label, so it's very important that the label is still readable after being exposed to outdoor condition for a long time. Imagine your drum is standing outside in the sun for 2 years, and it can be pretty important to know that the content of the drum is still harming your health or is very flammable. On the top side, on the UV flexo printed label, you see that the image has faded. The colors, the blue and the red, are gone. On the bottom, printed with UV inkjet, the image is still readable. So I guess that's preferred for if the if your application is very durable and your label has to last for a very long time. On the right side, we even went further and we did accelerated aging in the climate chamber with even a higher dose of UV light, simulating up to 5 years of outdoor use. Okay, that's fourth technology is water-based inkjet. The print head is very comparable to UV inkjet. It's in most cases it will be a more low-end print head, but also there's a chamber with ink, and the ink is pushed out of the chamber, will form a drop, and then the drop is jetted in the direction of the substrate. These printers on this moment, most printers we see with water-based inkjet technology for label application are desktop printers, and then the investment, the cost of a printer is relatively low, but the cost of the substrate is relatively high. Why is the substrate so expensive? That's because you need a very thick top coat. Because the top coat has to be able to absorb the full layer of ink. And if you think about printing a very dark color, then it might be up to something like 15 milliliters per square meter of water, of ink that has to be absorbed into the top coat. The ink, the color can come from pigments or from dyes. And a dye-based, that's a little bit easier to construct, but it's less durable, so it's very sensitive to UV fading. And then pigment are a little bit better, are much better in UV resistance. Also here we see that the major part of the ink consists of water and humectant, and again something like 8 to 10% of the ink is the colorant, and that's the pigment and or the dye. Concerning speed, a desktop printer can work up to 5 to 18 meters per minute, depending the quality and depending on your printer. And there are some industrial printers with water-based inkjet technology, and that can go achieve a speed up to 100 meters per minute, so also a very serious production speed. Also here, strong point of water-based inkjet is the compatibility with indirect food contact. If you need more durability, you can achieve that by a special top coat that will give you better water resistance and a better durability. Yep, correct. That's. If you think about different market segments and what digital technology is favorable, well, we look at pharma, food, home and personal care, wine and beverage, and durables. Let's start on the right. Think about durable technology, then UV inkjet is the best technology to choose, because the ink is so hard and so durable, it will last for a very long time. If you use water-based inkjet with a very specific substrate, or a very specific top coat, you can achieve a decent durability. So that's an option. It's not the most preferred technology, I would say there. If you think about food, then UV inkjet is a bit critical. You can use UV inkjet if you have a press with a low migration ink, but in general, it would not be. Then water-based inkjet and toner technologies are to be preferred. That's also, of course, with pharma. And then for home and personal care and wine and beverage, you can use any technology, just whatever you have available, or what is, then there are more arguments to choose from. Okay. Then if we summarize everything into a table, if you first look at the top coat, With liquid toner, you need a specific top coat, can be applied inline in your HP Indigo press with a ILP unit or a pre-treated substrate. With dry toner, you can use a standard substrate. UV inkjet, it's depending, sometimes standard, sometimes special. Water-based inkjet definitely needs a specific top coat with a very thick layer. So also the cost of a water-based inkjet substrate is really very high. Dry toner, because you can use a standard top coat, is always a relatively low cost substrate. And then with UV inkjet and liquid toner, there can be some upcharge because of the top coat. Concerning food safety, dry toner is the preferred technology. Liquid toner and water-based inkjet can be used as well. UV inkjet can be sometimes a bit challenging. Then durability, UV inkjet best in class, and the other technologies can be a bit more challenging. Thinking about image quality, toner technologies will give you the best image quality. UV inkjet and water-based inkjet give you a decent image quality, but if you compare it to toner technologies, then the toner will outperform the inkjet technologies. Looking at speed, toner is relatively slow, although HP will come with a very fast machine that, of course, will also be more expensive. But, so far, it is limited to, let's say, 30 meters per minute. UV inkjet presses have become much faster in the past few years. They go up to 100 meters. Water-based inkjet, the industrial machines, go up to 100 meters, and the desktop printers will be slower. That was it from my part. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Frank. Before we move to the next part, we have some questions. I will read them through, and I think some of the answers we already gave during the presentation, but let's anyway go through that one by one. So David Scott is asking us, what are the pros and cons of liquid toner with dry toner? I think we covered that in these slides, but maybe Frank, you want to just one more time talk that through just to make sure that we answer the question.
Liquid toner, like I said, will always need this specific pre-treatment to achieve a decent ink anchorage. You can achieve that you can get that pre-treatment with inline primer, or you can get it by pre-treated substrate. Dry toner can work with any substrate as long as it is the ice toner. If it is a normal toner, so the non-ice toner, PEs can be a bit challenging. That's the main differences, and then there are secondary arguments like HP is using the click charge and Sycon is not using the click charge. So that's more the secondary arguments related to pricing. Does that answer?
Okay. David, I hope it answered the question. If not, please comment in the question section, or you can contact us afterwards, and we handle that. Thank you for the question. Next question come from. Let me. From Keith MacArthur on HP Indigo. When ink varnishes scrape off of the material very easily, what likely the cause? So basically, question to the durability of the liquid electrophotography.
And is that referring? That's an offline varnish.
I think it doesn't matter if.
I would think that there is a non-compatibility between the toner and the varnish. So if the varnish does not stick on the toner, then it will give a poor result.
From my side, Keith, I think we need to distinguish here as ink and varnishes, because if indeed we're talking about varnish performance, that's probably not the right varnish, as Frank just rightly said. But if we talk about ink durability, that's the basically feature of the technology. That's what we also outlined, that the inkjet is UV inkjet is more durable, while the liquid electrophotography has a different advantages, while actually the durability suffer a bit. So hope it answers the question. If not, please let us know, and we will go a little bit more in details. A question from Eric Kops. What is the indirect food contact? Either a material applies to food contact required, or it is not. In the later case, an extra barrier is needed. Indirect food contact. A food safety certificate does not make a distinction between direct or indirect food contact. Indirect food contact or not, so who can handle that? Frank, can you answer that?
No, I'm not too familiar with the food contact certification. Do you know more about it, Vlad?
Corey?
I'm not too familiar with it myself, to be honest with you. I'm not sure I fully understand.
Eric, what we can do, we have a webinar planned for 27th of July, where we will be talking about digital printing for the food segments, and we'll have a compliance expert on the webinar who will handle the topic and who will discuss this question in more further details. So we can either take this question offline, or if you have time, we can also join the webinar on the 27th of July. There will be topic we'll be discussing in very in all the details. So hope it will give you an answer. Next one is from Eric as well. A paper substrate does not require a thick absorbing top coating. Only plastics need that. I guess Eric is referring to the water-based inkjet technology, right?
Yes. There are two functions of the top coat. You have to control the spreading of the ink, and you have to store the water, so absorption. If you talk about a paper substrate, then part of the absorption of the water from the ink can be done in the bulk of the paper. Then if you want to control the spreading of the ink, the paper may allow the ink to spread too much, so you have to control the spreading a bit. And then what you can do is apply a top coat that does not have the full thickness, but is a little bit thinner, let's say 50% of the thickness. Then you control the spreading of the ink by the top coat, and the absorption of the ink, of the water, is done partly in the top coat. And if the top coat is not sufficient, then the rest of the water can be absorbed into the paper. That's what you often see in paper substrate. If you think about a photo paper, then the top coat is thick enough to spreading and the absorption.
And also from my side, I would add, Eric, that if we talk about water-based inkjet technology and we compare the thickness and the amount of top coat put per square meter of paper or film, indeed the paper requires less top coat than film. But still, nevertheless, if you want to print on a desktop printer without inline primering station, then you would require special material with a special top coat in order to have a good print performance. If we go to the next question, which is coming from Tony Hills, are special materials required for solvent inkjet print heads?
Solvent inkjet print heads. Solvent is a bit rare in the label industry, as far as I know. Solvent technology is widely used in the graphics industry. In the label industry, I'm not too much aware of solvent technology.
Okay, Corey, maybe you know something.
Well, I see another question that may be related to this around the Epson SurePress, and that press and that technology, it uses a resin pigment ink technology, and that allows users of that press to pretty much print on standard materials. So hopefully that answers Boris's question on that, and I think it's related to the other as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Corey. Then I have to Ton and to Boris. In case the question is not, the answer is not sufficient, we can please also contact us afterwards. We'll make sure that we will mobilize our colleagues, experts in the solvent area, and we can gonna give you a bit more details, or maybe organize a specialized session when we can, handle all the questions and share our experience. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the next questions. Good that we have a lot of questions. Can you print on thermal substrates using ice toner in the dry toner printer? Question from Peter Nielsen.
Vlad, are you familiar with thermal?
Yeah. So yes, you can do that, but I cannot speak for all the thermal papers. We have some thermals we tested at Xicon with the ice toner, and they perform well. However, we haven't tested all possible thermal papers, so maybe some of them will not be performing well. Maybe all of them will perform well. So if you would need exact recommendation what type of thermal paper you can use on Xicon with an ice toner, please let's take it offline, and I will send you a link or like just product data sheet for the product which you can use for this machine. Next question is which technology not sure which tech is more in terms of cost of ink per square meter. Okay, so basically we're talking about the cost of ink per square meter.
That's a difficult question. I was talking to a converter a while ago about the cost of ink, and that converter said, well, the cost of ink, that's a matter of negotiation. There's a big bandwidth in the price of ink. As far as I know, there's not a standard list price for ink, so it's really depending on the quantity you buy. And I guess that if you pay the highest price for a machine, that potentially you will get a lower price for the inks, or the other way around. I know in the past it was a different industry, it was still in production. The company I was working for, we were getting a printer for free, but the supplier knew that we would be using a lot of ink. So they did make the money from the ink. And in basic, if you look at water-based inkjet, the desktop printers, not only the substrate is expensive, but also the ink is very, very expensive. I think I've heard that the price per kilo or per liter of ink was higher than the price of gold. I don't know if that's always valid. Now, for the desktop printer I have at home, that's valid. For more tabletop printer for labels where you use more ink, that will not be valid, but it is expensive stuff.
Thank you, Frank. Indeed we are probably we need to consult with somebody from the ink industry to comment on that. We are not the first person to comment on the prices on the inks, but what I also understand that if you compare water-based flexo and UV flexo and water-based inkjet and UV inkjet, not obviously desktop but industrial machines, that the water-based inks are somewhat cheaper than UV. Maybe Corey, you know something, because in the US you use a lot of water-based flexo.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not too in the know on the cost of the inks on the flexo side here.
All right, good. Sorry, Asad, for not probably answering your question, but yeah, we can connect you to some of our colleagues with the ink producers, then they can help you with that. Thank you. So on that note, I think we are done with questions for the first part. Then I suggest we move to the second part of our webinar today. Corey, can you take us through the digital trends and technology development?
Absolutely. Thank you, Vlad, and good day, everybody. Yeah, for the next segment here, I'll take you on a very quick tour, highlighting some of the insights related to the different digital platforms that Frank spoke to earlier. Hopefully, this will give you an understanding of both kind of the current situation and maybe even a glimpse into kind of where things are going in the future. Hopefully, this will answer some of the questions that maybe you've brought into this webinar, or generate some new ones that you can add in, and we'll try to cover as time permits. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So the very first technology platform we want to talk a little bit about is toner. And in this area, there's really two high-level trends that I think are really noteworthy from my perspective. One is increased productivity, and then the second being expanded application range. So let me elaborate a little bit on both of these to give you a little bit more understanding. So in terms of increased productivity, really trying to make the point that these presses, as the technology has advanced and matured, these presses are getting wider and faster effectively. So for example, the Zykon's CX500, which made its North America debut last November, it's pictured here on this slide. This is a press that can run at just under 100 feet per minute and prints at up to 20 inches wide. And that's noteworthy because you know, it wasn't too many years ago where Zykon's flagship press would only run at 13 inches wide and maybe 30 meters a minute or so. So it's really interesting to see how fast the technology has evolved and how that advancement in productivity is giving converters a lot more flexibility as they incorporate digital into their operations and kind of optimize jobs that would run or could run on digital versus analog or flexo. The same phenomenon is happening on the liquid side, liquid toner, or HP Indigo, where say a 6900 press today prints at 13 inches and 30 meters per minute. You can go wider and faster today by either going in the direction of an 8000 press, which has two 6900 print engines in line, so you can double your speed up to 60 meters a minute. And if you want to go wide, there's the HP 20000, which you can print up to 30 inches wide. And I know they're really positioning that press for market segments, including flexible packaging. As Frank has already mentioned, in terms of the future, we're expecting a continued evolution and another step change in speed as we await the launch of the HP Indigo V12 press, which is expected to be commercially available, I believe, in early 2022. And this is going to be the first label press with the LEPX technology, and it's going to include 6 inline print engines, which is going to be a big enabler to get to that close to 400 feet per minute, really starting to rival the speeds you can achieve with flexo for longer jobs, longer run print jobs. The second trend, I guess I would call it, that I'd like to highlight here is what I'm calling expanded application range. And this is really to make the point that it's not just about printing labels anymore. There's a lot of other opportunities and growth potential for converters. And I think a good way to illustrate this and how the toner technology has evolved is if we look at flexible packaging. As many of you may know, and maybe you're already participating in this area, it's a high growth part of the market that's really driven by consumers on-the-go consumption of food and the stand-up pouches that many products are put into these days. And so both Zykon and HP Indigo have advanced their platforms to offer solutions to allow converters to participate in this flexible packaging area. Zykon with their FlexFlow system and HP Indigo with their pack-ready solution. And in both cases, you could take advantage of the digital press that you may already have, and then with use of a special thermal laminating process, you can create the finished final structure to be able to participate in this kind of newer growth area of the market. So just an example of how the technology is evolving as the market is evolving. So if we go to the next slide, we'll take a look, again, very high level, and very quick here, but I wanted to point out what I think are a few really noteworthy trends from a UV inkjet perspective. I'd like to point out three things: hybrid presses, the ongoing improvement around image quality, and as Frank's already mentioned, the trend towards low migration inks. So while we would expect to see standalone UV inkjet presses continuing to represent the bulk of the new press installations that we're going to continue to see, we have made note of and are starting to see some customers start to take ownership of these hybrid presses that incorporate both the benefits of traditional flexo printing as well as the advantages of digital, all really in one machine. So what's interesting about this is that it can, and by combining the flexo and UV inkjet together, it really gives converters that ultimate flexibility. So the longer runs can be printed exclusively flexo, while shorter runs and runs that would require variability can be printed with a combination of flexo and digital, or digital only. And then there's really some other advantages with these hybrid presses as far as being able to both print and finish in line versus a separate offline finishing step, and the ability to really take advantage of the flexo print stations, both for either putting down a primer to then allow you to use a more standard substrate that you may be bringing in for your flexo operation, so that it can be printed digitally. And you could also take advantage of those print stations to achieve some unique tactile feel or decorative effects that you can achieve, like cold foiling, for example. So we're going to expect to see more of these presses being brought online, in addition to the continued placement of the standalone presses. But that's definitely a trend we're keeping an eye on. Secondly, enhanced image quality is another trend. Frank made the point of calling out that relative to the other print technologies, and toner specifically, UV inkjet might not be quite there yet from an image quality standpoint. However, it has been impressive to see how the technology has evolved over the last 10 years, including how much improved the image quality has become. And certainly there's a lot of factors that go into this, that would include the print head, the ink system, the substrate even that you're printing on, and then the software on the press that kind of orchestrates all of this. But if you take a look at the print head specifically, it is certainly one of the key drivers of the print quality. And I would offer up and say that I think we're kind of in sort of the third generation of print heads in these presses, going back to say 2006 with the EFI Jetreon and the Durst Tau 150. That really represented the kind of first generation of print heads using the ZAR 1001 print head. And then at around 2012, I would say we started then the second generation with the Kyocera KJ4, and this is the print head that's used currently on the Domino N610i and the Screen True Press platforms. And now we've started to see, and really starting back in 2016, the current or sort of third generation of print heads using the Fujifilm Samba G3L. And this is what's embedded into the Durst Tau RSC and the Gallus label fire that you can see here on the slide image. And this is noteworthy because through that evolution, we've been able to see, and we know from talking to these OEMs that you're able to achieve with the Fujifilm, as an example, 1200 DPI and a drop size of down to 2.4 picoliters. So this is really helping to drive the advancement in image quality, and we would continue to expect just the ongoing evolution of these print heads to get even better into the future. The last trend I'd like to just quickly highlight is low migration inks. Again, Frank's already mentioned this, so I won't belabor the point too much, other than to say that this is all born really out of increasing consumer awareness and brand awareness and sensitivity to food safety concerns. So taking that into account, many of the OEMs have now, as Frank said, started to introduce low migration ink sets. I can speak from a North American standpoint and say that while these ink systems are available, I'm not aware of very many converters actually adopting them yet. My suspicion is that's partially due to the higher cost of the low migration inks, as well as just some of the complexities of trying to change ink systems. But my assumption or my guess is that we'll probably start to see more of these low migration ink sets being introduced when converters, take on new installations with UV inkjet presses. That they'll just maybe dedicate a new press to use the lower migration, ink versus one that they may already have with a traditional, UV ink system. Something we're certainly keeping an eye on. So next, if we move to water-based inkjet, there's a couple of trends I'd like to highlight here. The first is next generation print heads and inks, and then secondly, the development of what I would call more production class options. So if we take a look at print heads and inks, it was mentioned earlier from Frank as we were educated a little bit there that there are really two types of inks for water-based inkjet used in the label world, either dye-based or pigment-based inks. And I really like to use an example of how dye-based inks have actually evolved with kind of a new generation, much more durable dye-based inks that have been introduced onto the market. Historically, one of the historically, if we looked at dye-based inks versus pigment, they offer a wider color gamut. They help enable shorter dry times, and they're often a lot more compatible with more substrates. But that has come on the flip side with being significantly less water resistant and chemical resistant compared to pigment inks. While this new generation of dye-based inks certainly isn't as durable as pigment inks, there have been advancements. And so, for example, here, I've got a picture of this Affinia L901 printer, and this is utilizing their new Water Shield inks, which is really kind of their branded version of Memjet's VersaPass DN inks. And this represents kind of the latest generation of dye-based inks. And according to Affinia, they're really touting this technology, this ink, to be much more resistant to the effects of prolonged moisture exposure than conventional dye-based inks. And they're really now positioning this L901 with the Water Shield inks for applications that could include chilled beverages, foods, and even chemical or some pharmaceutical applications. So that's just an example of how we're seeing the advancements in dye-based inks for water-based inkjet. From the print head side of things, we're seeing a similar trend like we talked about in UV inkjet. So as an example, Memjet has recently introduced their Duraflex 4-color printhead system. And this is really a technology platform that enables OEMs to build benchtop, light production, or even entry-level presses by being able to stitch together this printhead, this Duraflex printhead, which is available at either 8.77 inches or 12.77 inches, so they can be stitched together for a maximum width up to actually 50 inches. Delivers 1600 DPI, and you can print up to 150 feet a minute. And one of the most noteworthy things, in my opinion, is they claim that this new system, this Duraflex system, can provide much longer printhead life. I believe I've seen it or heard that it could provide up to four times longer printhead life. So that would be hugely impactful. The last trend I'd like to point out around water-based inkjet is the production class options. Traditionally, water-based inkjet, from a label printing standpoint, has been reserved to desktop printers for more print-on-demand applications. But we've really started to see an emergence of what I would call kind of mini presses, sort of standalone label presses like the Trojan Label T4 as an example. We've got a few others listed here as well, but these are self-contained mini presses that, again, if you take a look at the Trojan Label T4 as an example, this is a machine that allows you to print, die cut, and even over laminate all in line. Speeds up to 18 meters a minute and up to 8.8 inches wide. And this all comes in a package with a price of just maybe over $100,000 US. So a lot of features built into a relatively low-priced piece of equipment that is a good option for converters who are maybe looking to sort of make their first entry into digital. And we've even started to see some manufacturers who are considering bringing label production in-house, that this is the type of platform that maybe can help them make that, get over that hurdle and maybe bring the label production in-house. So those are admittedly very quick, high-level trends, but hopefully this has provided a few insights and maybe has generated some questions. If we have a few minutes of time, I'd be happy to try to answer whatever has come in. So Vlad, I'll turn it back over to you in case there's some questions.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it. So now we have Q&A session, the last Q&A session, but I just like to ask you to hold on for a couple of more minutes after that, because there are a couple of more interesting things we would like to share with you. So, but before that, before the wrap up with these things, any questions to Corey or Frank? I have a question from David Crombie. Are HP and Avery working on solution to overcome print quality issues on uncoated papers? David, I haven't heard of any issues, or maybe particular issues sometimes coming up with some of the customers, but I'm not sure what you are referring to. We're definitely working together with HP, and if you have some challenges, please address it to us. We'll take it with them and see if we can solve this problem. So when the presentation will be shared with you, you will have my email address. So please send me an email. We'll have a look at what problem you are talking about and how can we help. Okay, any more questions from anybody? So question from Daniel Novak. Hello to Avery. Is there any product developments also for dry toner sheet system like Xerox in terms of synthetics? Are you talking, Daniel? I think we need to be a bit more specific here. Are you talking about the desktop sheet fed business, or it's industrial scale sheet fed business? Because we do have some solutions for toner technology, because if you talk about Xerox as a toner technology for sheet fed business, in this case we are using the Kraft thick liners, but we do not supply the material in sheets. Usually our customers who are active in this business, they produce sheets out of the rolls we supply, but generally we do have products. I'm not sure if it answers your question, or if you're talking about any specific printer, let's take it offline as well. Okay, our market is answered. So if there are no more questions, we have a couple of minutes left, and I just want to give a couple of closing remarks. So today we talked about technology strengths and material selection, but now practical questions: what products to select for your particular printing press? And to answer that questions, we launched like a couple of months ago a digital tool. It is called Digital Material Guide. How to find it? You can go to Avery Dennison website, and then on right-hand side, you will see the section called Customer Tools. By clicking this Customer Tools, you can select Digital Material Guide, and you'll get into the system. Then what you need to do is just to select technology and your printing model, and you will see the list of products qualified or tested for your printing press. There are more filters needed, like type of face material, adhesive, market segment, etc., but it's pretty interactive, easy to use tool to find what are the right products for your printing machine. Also, this tool is a living document, as we constantly test new materials and add it to the database. So if you don't find some materials, it does not necessarily mean that they're not compatible. Maybe we haven't tested it yet. So we refresh this information and extend this database every month. Now let's look at the polls. If you remember, the question was, are you considering investing in digital printing in the next 1-2 years? And we have several questions: yes in toner electrophotography, yes in inkjet, yes in both technologies, yes but I haven't made up my mind, and no. So we have 55% of people answered yes, but they haven't made their minds about what type of technology to choose. However, I think the statistics is not very representative, because looking at the number of people who participated in the webinar, we have only a limited number of people who answered that question. So please, if you haven't clicked on one of this answer, you still have a couple of minutes to do so. And you can also see the results yourself at the polls. I think everybody will be interested to see the response rate from the majority of the people. Yeah, I see some actually the statistics change while we speak, and more people actually looking at the inkjets. So let's give a couple of more minutes to see if there are more people answering. So now we have the majority of people are looking at the investment in the inkjet actually in the coming years. And the very last thing before we go, for those who haven't registered, we have a next webinar coming on the 9th of July, so basically next week, where we'll be talking about functional labels printed digitally. And we have a special guest speaker from outside of the Avery, Dennison. So if you like this webinar, please join the next one. You'll find the registration link in the presentation, which will be shared with you after the session, or in one of our newsletter where we announce those webinars. And we will continue with those webinars. Today was more like a general session where we briefly go through trends and technologies, but we will go more in detail to specific print jobs, specific printers, running some case studies, etc., etc. So please, if you're interested, follow the newsletter and register for the next one. On that note, thank you very much for joining, and have a great rest of the day, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.